great seeing kids up here. So yesterday when we got the chairs just right, we added a row to the front, but apparently we need to add some steps too. The amount of kids in Children's Story, it was full. It's good to see kids in church. It's also good to hear the organ. Thank you, Brenton. So you may have seen in a newsletter a couple weeks ago, I'm not big into sports. I know that seeing me up here and seeing my physique, that's probably a surprise to you. I don't know if I appreciated that laughter. But sports were never my thing. But the Olympics, there's something special about the Olympics. And maybe it's because they have sports like curling. It's like, okay, I can sweep. I might be able to do that. Maybe it's because they have people ice skating at such incredible speeds that I wouldn't feel safe driving at those speeds. And maybe it's the way they go careening down mountains. I don't know what it is, but the Olympics, especially the Winter Olympics, I enjoy watching those. The drama that unfolds, these stories that come to life out of the Olympics. I think of Lindsey Vonn, who crashed years ago, and she's there again. And not only that, but she's 41 years old, and I didn't appreciate the way they talked about her age like that. 41, no, to be 41 again. I was at the grocery store yesterday. I asked the cashier how his week had been. He said it was a rough week. He said, I turned 30 this week. I informed him my next milestone was 50. And that's when it went downhill. Because that gentleman looked at me and said, a lot of people don't live that long. So at 41 there, Lindsey Vonn is back. And then she crashes again. Like her arm catches that flag and she goes flying through the air at 80 miles an hour. It's okay because there's Breezy Johnson. You know you're destined for the Olympics when your parents name you Breezy. She takes the gold. And then we get to the Super G and she wrecks. It's triumph and tragedy over and over again. But I think one of the most incredible stories was Kristen Santos Griswold, a speed skater. And there in the 500s, there's no time for error. You've got to be on it from the moment it starts until the moment it ends. And they take off and the person next to her gives her a little shove and she goes careening. But because it was before the first curve, apparently they get to do it over. And so they get back up and they start over. And the second time, again, she's shoved and she goes flying. And speed skating, when one person goes flying, it's a little like dominoes. Multiple people go flying. And so, again, they start over. The third time, she's knocked over. And finally, they take out the person who keeps pushing, and they make it through with no falling. But after so many times of starting over, she comes from the back and takes the gold. Well, not the gold, I should say, because this was the semifinals. But she wins that heat. And then it's time for the quarterfinals. And right after the first corner, somebody bumps into her and she goes flying. And that one mistake It's all over. All of those times she failed and got back up, all of those times where she could have given up, but she still came out and won. One fall. And it didn't matter. Sometimes in our Christian journey, we feel that way, don't we? Where we make a mistake and it's over. But that's not how it works. Whether our mistake is accidental or intentional. Whether we hurt people accidentally or on purpose. We recognize that when we mess up, we can't fix it. But Jesus can. As he hung on that cross, and he said those words, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." I want you to recognize that when each of us sins, we contribute to Jesus needing to be hung on the cross. We take part in the crucifixion. But because we take part in the crucifixion, then those words, "Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing," those words now cover us too. From the very first sin until Jesus comes again, those are covered by those words, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Before you were born, Jesus already spoke those words for your life. But there is one barrier to forgiveness. And we find this articulated in the parable in Matthew 18, the parable of the unforgiving servant. You see, there was someone who had gone into debt. And we are talking serious debt, 10,000 talents. Well, for those of you who don't have a working knowledge of what a talent is, a talent is about 20 years of pay. Yes. So 10,000 talents is about 200,000 years of pay. This was no small amount of money he owed. If we take what is the average yearly pay, it comes out to 10,000 talents is about $12.75 billion. This is what he is in debt. And the Lord calls him in and he says, "Hey, let me work it off." $200,000 years later, there was no working it off. Even if he had 20 people who he could put into slavery to help him pay this debt, it would still be 10,000 years. There was no working it off. There was no other way. And so the Lord just says to him, "It's forgiven. It's forgiven. All of that. There's no need to work anything off because it's done." And he goes out and he sees someone who owes him money. Using the same metric, that person owed him about $21,000, which is not a small amount, unless you think about the 12.75 billion. And he says to this guy, "I need you to pay me back." He says, "I don't have the money right now, but let me work it off." You see, 100 denarii, which is what the second one owed him, That was about 100 days' wages. It would have been hard, but it was doable. And instead, he threw him into prison, which didn't allow him to pay him back. It didn't allow it to be fixed. It just punished him. And the master hears of this. And he calls the first one in and he says, no. That's not how this works. You see, I can only forgive you when you forgive others. There seems to be a barrier to forgiveness, and that is God only can forgive us when we can forgive others. We find this in the Lord's Prayer. We find it mentioned from time to time, but why is that? Why is our forgiveness contingent on our ability to forgive other people? Have you ever thought about what forgiveness is? You see, when people hurt us and we hold on to that, it's kind of like holding on to their trash. It's not even ours, and it's their trash, and we're holding on to it, and God comes in to take our trash out, and we let go of our trash, but we're still holding on to trash. And it's not even ours. And we somehow think that's punishing them. But it's not, because we're the ones holding the trash. Let's be honest for a moment. This sounds easy. This sounds simplistic, because when we're deeply hurt, it's not that easy. I remember once when I was still young in my 20s, I preached a sermon about forgiveness, and a member came up to me afterwards and she said, "Pastor, you do not understand. I cannot forgive my brother. You don't know what he did to me. I cannot do it. Don't ever ask that of me again." And it's true. I did not understand. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we would rather not have understood. And this is why this parable immediately follows Peter asking Jesus about forgiveness. Peter says to Jesus, "Jesus, do we really need to forgive somebody 7 times? That seems like a lot." And I always had interpreted this as somebody comes up to you and they slap you across the face and you forgive them. They slap you again, you forgive them again. And Peter is saying, "Jesus, do we need to do this 7 times in a row? Because that seems excessive." And depending on which version you have, it might say 77 times, or it might say 70 times 7, which is 490 times. And Jesus is saying, like, absolutely not. 7 doesn't cover it. You got to keep going. And you're like, "Jesus, doesn't that seem like we're supporting the abuser if we keep allowing them to do this over and over again?" And that's what I used to think until I had been deeply hurt. Because you realize when someone deeply hurts you, and the people who hurt us the deepest are the ones who we love the most. It's our family members. It's our spouses. It's the church. The ones who hurt us the most are the ones who we've let in. And when those people hurt you, forgiveness, it's not easy. And when you finally get to the point where you're able to forgive them, you realize later that all of a sudden those feelings are back. It's not that they have to keep hurting you. It's that forgiveness is a process that comes over and over and over again. We've got to keep forgiving because we have those triggers. We have those things that bring us right back to that point of pain. Even when we thought we had let it go, there it is all over again. And Jesus is saying, no. Once doesn't cover that. You've got to forgive them. 77 times, 490 times, you just keep going. There is no limit. And the deeper the pain, the more times you might have to forgive. I don't know about you guys, but it does us no good to hold on to other people's trash. Sometimes we feel like, well, I can't forgive them. They haven't asked for forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about you undoing their sin. That's what God does. Your forgiveness is about you letting go of it so that you're not holding on to their trash. And it has nothing to do with whether they know you're holding on to it or not. It's about you. But sometimes the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. When we mess up, when we fail, when we hurt the people we're supposed to be protecting, when it becomes difficult to look in the mirror, because the person looking back to you, you're not okay with that person. But the God of the universe, as he hung upon the cross, as he was at his absolute darkest, the only person who didn't deserve it, and he said, Father, forgive them. You were included. The God of the universe longs to forgive you too. Will you let him? There's a man by the name of Ian Waterman. Ian Waterman got a virus. I am not a medical doctor. I'm not going to explain the virus. But this virus did something to his nervous system, and he lost all feeling from his neck down. And the thing is it did not paralyze him, but we use our feeling a lot more than we understand, because, like, recognizing that my hand is here in the air, I'm feeling my hand. And if you can't feel your hand, if you can't feel your foot, you can't recognize where it is. And so he became paralyzed because he couldn't sense his body. He lost his body. And he became paralyzed. He could not move, not because the muscles wouldn't work, but just because he couldn't feel them. And so he learned how to move again. And for him to do the simplest tasks like sit in a chair, he has to think through absolutely everything. He has to imagine where his hand is going to go. He's going to have to imagine how it's going to feel there. He's going to have to imagine his weight shifting. And he imagines and thinks through the entire thing. And then after he has planned it out in his head, then he goes through the actions. And it takes an immense amount of work for what we can do without thinking at all. Tying his shoes is an ordeal. And it takes so much work and so much planning to do the simplest tasks, because when our feelings don't match our reality, there's a disconnect, and it takes extra work. Although Jesus has died on the cross already, there are times in life where our feelings do not match our reality. Where we do not feel like forgiving someone, when we do not feel as though we can be forgiven, when we do not feel as though there's any way to make that relationship right again. And let's be honest, in a church this size, you can't get through life without being hurt. Every one of you knows exactly what I'm talking about. But even if your feelings do not match your reality, I heard you. Start forgiving. You may have to do it twice. You may have to do it 3 times. You may have to do it 490 times. But keep letting go of that trash. Because it makes no sense to hold on.